إحياء هؤلاء these people ولكن أكثر الناس هم الكفار لا يشكرون. Okay, so this we can understand that said life and death and these things
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. I think we might just wait for a few more people to join. maybe we'll wait a few more minutes, inshallah, and then we'll make a start. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Muddasser, and I'm one of the students at Darul studying with Mufti Tawsir. This topic that we'll be covering today is the Islamic view of genetic screening and testing. I believe Mufti Saab has sent out the slides. If you don't have them, they are being shown on the screen. Is everyone able to see the screen? Okay, so even if you haven't been sent the slides, they are being on this displayed on the screen, so we can just use those. And if you need the slides, Mufti Saab can send them to you, or if I get your details, I can also send them to you, inshallah. Moving on to the second slide, as mentioned here, this presentation is part of some research done in this particular area. It is not a final fatwa on the issue. For a final fatwa, it's best if a person refers to their local muftis, inshallah. So some of the topics that we'll be covering today is some basic information about genetics and how it has been used by today's medicine to enhance human health, as well as what is genetic screening and testing and its different types. And then we'll be moving on to some of the complexities that are involved with genetic information, as well as references to genetics in the Quran, Sunnah, as well as the time of the Sahaba. And then we'll sort of get into looking at a framework that can be used to possibly arrive at a view about genetic screening and testing. So starting off, what is genetics? It's a study of the hereditary and the variation of inherited characteristics We now know that every single cell of the body, well, most cells of the body have a nucleus that has the DNA, which is made up of many, many genes that are simple, small units of information that then are used in the different functions to make proteins, to make different enzymes and things that are required by the body. The human genome was was mapped out in a 13-year international collaborative effort. When this technology was first introduced, it was very costly. Now people are able to do it at a much cheaper cost, and for that reason, it is being used more often, both within the medical field as well as people who are just simply interested in knowing about their DNA. They are going ahead and paying certain amounts to private companies, providing swabs of their some of their cells from their mouth linings, and then finding out their DNA sequence, and then some information that can be derived from there. So it is a area of much growth. Um, the the next slide is about how has genetics been used to enhance human health. So the genetic testing is offered in many different times of life. You've got people who, even before a person may fall pregnant, they can have their DNA tested, as well as the DNA of their partner. Then, once a woman is pregnant, then also their DNA can be tested of of the fetus, and then also afterwards, later in life, DNA testing is available. So you can have preconception, pre-implantation, prenatal, neonatal, pediatric, adult, and posthumous settings. All these different stages of life, there are now different DNA tests that are available, and they are all used in different capacities to enhance human health and provide some information about a disease if it has a genetic background or genetic basis. And a lot of research is currently being done in this area. And in this time and age, its genetics is seen as being at the forefront of enhancing human health through either preventing diseases or providing an option for the cure of diseases once they have set in. So, what is genetic screening and testing? What is done is that some DNA is extracted, and then that DNA is put through certain operations until a sequence is derived that this particular person has, say, in the a particular gene of theirs. This is the sequence they've got, ATCG, and then and they'll just continue from there onwards. It's possible to screen all the DNA of all the chromosomes in the body, of all the chromosomes in a particular cell, or it can be possible to only hone in on a particular chromosome or a particular gene, and then to analyze that one. If a person knows that they have a particular genetic condition and the gene that is associated with that particular condition is found on a particular chromosome at a particular location, so it's possible to just hone in onto that area and then to screen that bit of DNA. Likewise, when it comes to genetic testing, it's a voluntary thing where people in the medical field may advise that a person they would like for a person to undergo a particular test so that they can then analyze the results. It is not mandatory, even when in some countries there are um, requirements that when a baby is born, some of their blood is extracted from the heel, and then from that blood, some tests are done to ascertain whether this child has an increased risk of a particular disease. Even then, parents are required to provide their consent before even such testing can take place. So it's not of a mandatory nature. It is strongly encouraged in some instances by medical professionals, but a patient's consent is required before they can actually undergo that testing. And then the information that is provided from that test can then be analyzed by a genetic counselor, who can then, advise about issues got to do with, having children in the future and the different options, or how a person should change their lifestyle if they have an increased risk for a particular disease. So there are different types of genetic tests. Some, as we mentioned, are done to newborn babies. And I've mentioned the example here from Australia, that the heel prick test is done, and they test for PKU, hypothyroidism, and cystic fibrosis. There's also tests, as we mentioned, that can be done during pregnancy. Some are just screening tests to see if there's an increased risk, whereas others are diagnostic tests that can tell if, for example, a fetus has a defect or not. And likewise, some of these tests can be invasive while others are not. And invasive meaning that it would involve looking into the internal parts of one's body. Now we have a few graphs over here that show that when the genetic testing was first looked upon in the early 2000s, the cost was 100. I think that's 100 million per genome, and then how it's just dropped down greatly until now in 2019 or 2020, you can get it down for around $1,000 or less. How the whole genome can be tested and sequenced, which has led to an increase in the market for people wanting to undergo such testing, even if it is not advised by a medical professional. Another graph also shows it in a different form, how the global direct-to-customer genetic testing market, how it's increased. So now how many $1 million are currently being made through this market, and it keeps on increasing as more people are turning to this industry to have these tests done. The next graph shows us some commercial companies that do genetic testing. One famous one is 23andMe, and the revenue that they are making, the estimated total number of people that are getting their DNA tested by these companies. So we've got 9 million by one particular company and then 14 million by another. So you can see how many people are actually turning to this to use to obtain information about themselves. How can genetic testing help a person? So it can help with the diagnosis of a disease. It can pinpoint genetic factors that caused one's disease. It can predict how severe a person's disease may be. It can lead to them, it can advise them of future, lifestyle choices they should make in light of their prognosis. It can discover genetic factors that can increase one's risk of a disease. It can also look at some information got to do with hereditary, where a person can find out if they have the risk of passing on a disease onto their children. And it's also used for newborns, as we mentioned, and testing them for certain conditions, which, if addressed early in life, there's a greater likelihood of a person living a more normal and stable life in the future. Now, there's a lot of, there are many papers on the ethics of genetic information. which is because of the complexities of this type of information that is obtained from these tests. The reason being is that the implications of genetic information are not limited to a person themselves. If I was to choose to take a genetic test, the information that I gain would not only be limited to my own self, it would also affect other people that are related to the person that is undergoing that particular test. Likewise, it can be a precursor for future diseases, and then a person remains in a lot of anxiety about what will befall them in the future. Um, and likewise, it can lead to the identification of disorders which not necessarily have a treatment at the moment. So um, a person's against left with a lot of distress and anxiety. Then likewise, as there is with everything these days that has to do with data, they can be, people can steal the data that is obtained from the genetic test. There's questions about who owns the data. Are we actually, doing wrong to human dignity by taking this data and then, possibly modifying it, the sanctity of life. So there's many the informed consent. Is parental consent sufficient, or when it comes to the the screening of newborns? What about if the child later in the future says that I didn't actually want such testing to take place? Why did my parents give consent when I was born? So there's many issues that surround this topic that are discussed when it comes to the medical ethics. And they just add to the complexity of this issue in general. So we've got privacy, we've got policy, the ethics, society, equality, who's the right to that knowledge. Many things surround this. You've got issues got to do with say insurance companies, and if they get their hands on such data, which they can then use when it comes to deciding whether they will give an insurance policy to a particular individual because they may end up with the disease in the future. The issue of whether insurance is allowed or not is a separate one, but this is some of the issues that are related to this genetic screening and testing. Moving on, we know that Islam is a religion for every time and age. It is not limited to a particular time, and it covers every aspect of a person's life, whether it be personal, social, political, related to their family, maybe on a local or international level. Islam, and if we look at the books of fiqh, we can see that the different rulings address different aspects of one's life. Likewise, Islam is a religion forever. It's not, we know that no other prophet will come with a different sharia or anything like that. Islam is the religion and the way of life right till, forever. So it is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows of all these different issues that will arise in the future. And Islam, given its comprehensiveness, does provide a answer to these particular issues. Sometimes if we think that there isn't an answer, it's probably because we haven't actually looked further, or we haven't looked deep enough. But in reality, the answers are there if a person looks in deeply. And also the teachings of Islam can accommodate for these different new issues that arise, obviously within certain parameters. But when it comes to things like urf, which is the customs of people, Islam can accommodate for them, obviously based upon certain parameters and guidelines. Now we'll move on to some references to genetics in the Quran, Sunnah, and the Sahaba. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran in numerous locations how He has created human beings from the diversity. So we have the clay and then the drop, and how it then moves on to the alaqa stage and then to the mudghah stage, and then Allah creates the bones, and then He clothes the bones with flesh, and then he causes a human being to grow and have a definitive human form. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained in much detail all these different stages that take place, and uh, people that very leaders in their field, such as Keith Moore, who was a leader in his field of anatomy and human development. Some of them even go ahead and they have, confessed that the Quran has provided much detail that they didn't know about, and had it not been for the Quran providing that detail, human beings wouldn't have known about it till possibly a long time back, whereas the Quran has, well, a long time into the future, whereas the Quran has provided these details thousands of years earlier, which is obviously an evidence to prove that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the hadith, we say that an incident is mentioned. You can see on the screen here that how a mother gave birth to a child that had darker skin, and then a man brought that child, or a man complained to the Prophet ﷺ that my wife has given birth to such a child with such color, whereas the parents would have had a different color. So the Prophet ﷺ, to the nearest meaning, asked them about the camels, which are very common in in Arabia, and about the colors of the camels, how they can have one that is a bit darker amongst them, although the parents of that camel or the rest of the herd may be a bit different, maybe a lot different. So the wording of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that قال عسى أن يكون نزعه عرق قال وهذا عسى أن يكون نزعه عرق. This is translated as it is perhaps the strain to which it has reverted. Whereupon the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, it is perhaps the strain to which the child has reverted. So meaning that in the ancestry of this particular camel, there would have been a camel with a darker color, and this particular camel that has just been born further in its family line is expressing that darker color that was present amongst one of its ancestors. And the same thing can happen in human beings, how they can express something that not necessarily their parents actually express. And in today's genetics, this is known as dominant and recessive inheritance, where a recessive condition is such that a parent can be a carrier of it, meaning that they don't actually have to show, they don't have to express that condition, but they have the genes that can be passed on to their progeny that can then express that particular condition. And we now know that as dominant and recessive inheritance. And this particular section here is just a reference given to one of the explanations provided on this to this hadith by Imam an-Nawawi in his Sharh of Sahih Muslim. And this diagram shows here how a parent can be a carrier. So both here, the mother and the father, they carry this particular recessive, the small r over here, and we can see out of these four children over here, this one has received the larger R from both the parents, whereas the other child, if you look at this one and this one, they both received the larger R and the small r, whereas the last one has actually received the small r from both the parents. So this person will actually show the condition, although the parents did not show the condition. So that's similar to what has been explained in that hadith, as we now know it today in modern day genetics. Likewise, in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that a person should choose who they will marry, because hidden traits can reappear. So a person should be careful about who they choose as a spouse, and then accordingly, certain traits may appear within their children. If we move on to the next slide, which is about the Sahaba radiallahu anhum's time, we'll first touch on the consanguineous marriages, which are marriages taking place between people who are second cousins or closer. We know that in Islam a person is allowed to marry their cousin, whether it be their first cousin or their second cousin. And within the Middle East, a lot of the marriages are actually of this particular nature. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the second Khalifa, he's quoted to have mentioned to the tribe of Bani Sa'ib, who had become weak and unhealthy because of the intermarriage of cousins. And he advised them that, stop marrying within your own clan. Try to marry with people that are from faraway tribes, because then new genes can actually be introduced, or new variations of that gene can be introduced into your gene pool. Because if you don't, then those same genes are just being rotated, and then they can result in the accumulation of weak and unhealthy conditions. The next slide also has another narration from Umar radiallahu anhu, which translates to me that he told the people of Sa'ib that you have become slim and weak, thus marry strangers, again to introduce some variation within the gene pool, which would then lead to stronger genes being selected for, and then appearing within the children that are born. So now we'll sort of come towards a framework which could possibly be used when looking at the permissibility or impermissibility of genetic screening. So first of all, we should know that there are certain objectives to which all the different Islamic rulings can be traced back to. One is the preservation of faith, one's deen. We have the rulings got to do with jihad when it comes to preservation of one's faith, preservation of life. We know that there are certain consequences if a person is to take another person's life without having any right. There's a preservation of the mind. We know that intoxicants are prohibited because they cloud the mind. Preservation of one's progeny. We know that a person is not allowed to, a person's only allowed to have relations with the person that they are married with. They are not allowed to have relations outside wedlock. Likewise, there's the preservation of one's honor. So a person is not allowed to accuse another person of committing zina, for example. And if they do, then the had of qadf would apply to them. And likewise, there's a preservation of one's property, and for that reason, you have the prohibition of and the consequences if a person was to steal another person's belongings. So these are the main objectives of the Sharia, which the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh and Maqasid al-Sharia have come up with based upon their study of the rulings. They have derived these from there. And likewise, we have some overarching qawaid fiqhiyya, rules or legal maxims. One being matters. There are many of them. I'll just note down a few over here. So you have matters are determined according to their intentions, which stems from the famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, actions are judged by their intentions. The next one, hardship begets facility, or necessity renders prohibited things permissible. If a person's in a tough situation, then following particular guidelines, something that was prohibited may become permissible for them. Preventing harm is preferable to procuring benefits. So دفع الضرر is preventing harm is given preference over jalbul manfa'a, or obtaining some benefit. The basic concept in useful matters is permissiveness, um, and the basic concept in harmful matters is prohibition, and the protection of human life is one of the main principles of Sharia. So these are some of the legal maxims that could be viewed to then look into the issue of genetic screening. Over here, I've applied some of them. The legal maxim is provided on the left, and how it could be looked at when it comes to the issue of genetic screening or testing. So the first one being that the intention, probably from genetic screening, is to seek cure from a disease, or to ascertain a risk of future disease. And the information that's gained from this genetic screening is of a useful nature. But then obviously we need to look into how to handle that information, and how it should be protected from going into the wrong hands and being used for the wrong reasons. And then you have the protection of human life, which can be, helped by the early detection of diseases through such screening. One of the issues that arises with genetic screening is that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being, and He has provided certain dignity and sanctity for the human body, such that it cannot be used for whatever a person wants it to be used for. It has to be used in a way that does not go against the dignity and sanctity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it. So accordingly, the jurists have ruled that in general, it's impermissible to use any part of the human being for any reason. However, there are some circumstances in which this is allowed, such as some scholars have allowed the use of, transplants, organ donations, obviously within certain conditions and boundaries. Some scholars have allowed this. And looking at genetic screening from this perspective, it may be considered to be permissible if there's a particular need for a person to undergo this, and this particular avenue is advised to them by a skilled, expert Muslim medical practitioner, who ensures that there is a valid need for this to take place. Then it may be permissible for a person to then use the DNA that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala produces in their cells to be extracted and then be tested. However, if the testing is done just, people do it out of interest, they want to know of their origins, what percentage of them is, of a particular continent or a particular race, and another one from a different. If it's just for such information, then it may not be considered to be with the same ruling as if there is a medical need. And I mentioned earlier how this is becoming very famous. You've got websites such as 23andMe, who can send you a box in which you can just take out you can place something in your mouth, which would then leave some traces of your DNA, and then send that back to this company. And then they can do tests and provide you information about your DNA. So that's basically what I had prepared. Are there any questions, anything you would like to clarify. The sister has asked, do you know if the community is aware of the issues with consanguineous marriages? Um, I think it would differ from one community to another. Um, some may be aware, while some others may not be. It might even be the responsibility of the community leaders to make people aware of these issues by discussing them in public forums. But yeah, I think it would differ from one community to another. Are there any other questions? Do you know how accurate is genetic screening? It really comes down to the test that would be carried out. Some are more accurate than others. Some are more invasive than others. But normally, the medical practitioners that a person would consult regarding genetic screening would provide, an idea about how accurate they are. And maybe that could then also be considered into whether they are permissible or not. Maybe if they're not of a very high accuracy, that there isn't much benefit in doing them, then maybe the ruling may differ. But yeah, it just differs from one test to another, and the medical practitioners would be the best sources of information about how accurate they are. وإياكم. If there are no other questions, I think we might end there. Jazakumullah khair for attending, and I hope you benefited. And inshallah, may Allah reward Darul Ilm for providing such forums for such discussions, and inshallah we can have many more in the future. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.